So we're talking about macromolecules today, and the four major types of polymers or macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And so we're talking about lipids, and one example of a lipid is a phospholipid. And this is extremely important when we start talking about cell membranes and what kinds of things can go in and out of the cell membrane based on um, based on these phospholipids. So we need to know a little bit about their structure. Phospholipids are found in cell membranes. So cell membranes are made mostly of lipids called phospholipids. And so here's a cell, and this part is the cell membrane. It's like an envelope that the entire cell is in, and so it keeps the inside separate from the outside of the cell. And inside here in the cell membrane itself, it's made out of mainly phospholipid molecules. All of these internal structures in a complicated cell, which is a eukaryotic cell, these all have membranes in them too. They're not the outer cell membrane, but they're internal membranes. And they're also made out of phospholipids. So here's what they look like. This part is, let's fix this. This part is the lipid part that I showed you the other day. And so that would have that long chain of carbon with hydrogen sticking off of it, and this would too. And so the electrons they don't spend more time on one side or the other. This is completely nonpolar. And so that's why we call it hydrophobic. So this entire part of the cell membrane is hydrophobic. That means it does not mix with water. So water is more attracted to itself than it is to these things. So it shuns these things. This part, though, isn't really a lipid. It's just attached to the lipid. And so if you remember what a triglyceride looks like, it had that glycerol molecule and then it had 3 fatty acids that hung off of it. A phospholipid molecule is like that. It has a glycerol molecule, just like this one, and it has 2 fatty acid chains. So far the same. Instead of the third fatty acid chain, it has a phosphate group sticking up. There's a phosphate group that's charged, and then there's also some nitrogen that's charged. And so those charged things are not lipids because a lipid is defined as a nonpolar hydrophobic thing. So this is a really special molecule because it's part lipid and then part this hydrophilic polar part. So I put smiley faces on these usually to remind you that these things are hydrophilic. They love water. So this one is also hydrophilic. So each of these can be saying, I love water. So when we draw these in class, I am typically going to put smiley faces on these. So you can remember that they're saying, I love water. And the little folks down here, they're also going to be saying, I love water. I'm hydrophilic, I mix with water. So water's attracted to these things, but water shuns these. Water stays away from these. So when you have the cell membrane set up, the phospholipids will arrange themselves so that you have the tails on the inside and then the heads on the outside and how should I say this? The heads are going to be on one side and on the other side with the tails right in the middle, just like this. So this is the way a cell membrane looks with water on the outside of the cell and water on the inside of the cell. So you remember you're made of a lot of water, and that's because water is on the inside of all of your cells and water's on the outside of all of your cells. And so these cute little things are called the heads of the phospholipid, and all of these love water. In other words, water is attracted to them. Water is not attracted to these tails. They are nonpolar or hydrophobic. So this inside part here is non-polar, and remember water is polar. So water is more attracted to itself than it is to these. And then these out here are also polar. They love water, they're attracted to water, water is attracted to them. And so they look like this. Phospholipids have a head that is polar. So here's the polar head, and it's also called hydrophilic. It attracts water. So if you remember, water is polar. It's got an oxygen with 2 hydrogens. It's a bent molecule. You don't need to know why it's bent. You'll do that in chemistry next year, or I can certainly show you in class. But it's a bent molecule. The electrons spend more time here, and so electrons are negative. So this side is partially negative. And the electrons spend less time here. They're not very attracted to these tiny little hydrogens. So this is positive. or at least partially positive. That's why we put the parentheses around it. This polar head has some charges in it, and so the negative part of water is attracted to the positive charges in here, and the positive charges, or the positive part of water is attracted to the negative part of the head. And then the phospholipids also have these two tails that are nonpolar, and they repel water. They shun water, or actually water more likely shuns them. They're called hydrophobic, as in water fearing. So these are the parts that are the lipid part. So water's on the outside, water's on the inside, but water is not in the cell membrane itself. When there are a lot of phospholipids together, the tails stay together away from the water because they are, again, nonpolar. The phospholipid heads, that's this part, I love water. And this part, I love water too. And this part, we love water down here too. So the phospholipid heads mix well with water. The heads are these little circle parts because they are polar, just like water. So the outside and the inside of the cell membrane is made mostly of phospholipid heads, with the tails stuck right on the inside of the membrane. And this is actually what a cell membrane looks like this is a little bit closer to what it really looks like. So here are the phospholipid molecules. It's called a bilayer because there are two layers, so bi is for two. But there are proteins stuck in here. So here's a protein that works as a channel, and so certain materials can move in or out through this. Here's another protein molecule. Here's another protein molecule. This one happens to have a carbohydrate chain stuck to it. So we already covered carbohydrates a little bit, and we haven't covered proteins yet, but these two things are both different from lipids, and here are the phospholipids. Here's what it really looks like chemically. So we've been talking about phospholipids all this time, but I haven't shown you what it chemically really looks like this time. Yeah. So anyway, this part is a fatty acid. And remember when we talked about fatty acids before, we talked about saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids. Here's the unsaturated one. And so these are what we call the tails, the hydrophobic tails. And if you look at this hydrogen doesn't attract the electrons any harder than this one. They both are about the same. And so there's no funky charge distribution here. You've got water, which has that weird charge distribution. Remember, with the electrons preferring to stay with oxygen because it's such a big atom, they're more attracted to it. So the electrons are negative, so this side ends up being slightly negative. And the electrons don't spend quite as much time with the hydrogen, so this side ends up being partially positive. But take a look at this. You've got a negative charge here on the phosphate group, and you've got a positive charge here with this nitrogen. So water would be attracted to this. The negative charge here would attract the hydrogen ions of water. The hydrogen part of water. And the positive charge here would be attracted to the negative part of water, the oxygen side. And so water is going to be very attracted to this part of the molecule. But over here, water would be more attracted to other water molecules. Water is not going to mix with this stuff because a water molecule would always tend to be attracted toward other water molecules or to something that has a charge. So this part, same thing as this part, we call that the hydrophilic head, and it is polar. And so that's what the phospholipid bilayer looks like. You have these, and they're all lined up along here. The cell membrane is called a phospholipid bilayer, bi for two, because you can see it has two layers of these phospholipid molecules. So because it's made of phospholipids and it is 2 layers thick. Quiz time, what is this lipid called? Hopefully you can pause this and get them before I say them. This is a phospholipid. Which end of this cute molecule is hydrophilic? Well, hydrophilic means to love water, and this end loves water. I love water! Yay! Which end of this cute molecule is nonpolar? Well, this part is the part that shuns water, or water shuns it. It is that part. Which end of this cute molecule is hydrophobic? Again, hydrophobic means fear of, so fear of water. So the part that doesn't mix with water is part B, the tails. Which end of this cute molecule is polar? Water's polar, and so is the head. Yay, I love water! That actually has a full charge, not just polar. Which end of this cute molecule mixes with the water? Again, A. Because I love water. Which end of this cute molecule is like oil and does not mix with water? That's part B. I'm going to have you do that in class, and that is it for right now.